coffee, big cup, and hello. Welcome to another episode of the Gilmore Way Podcast. I'm Laura.
And I'm Kate. This week we are finally wrapping up our discussion of Christopher. Yes, you can all celebrate soon. We're almost done. Last but not least, we're digging into his second foray as a father with Sherry and Gigi.
Yep. Before we get into this final of our 3-part series on Chris as a dad, please just remember to do all of those YouTube things for us. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel, share it with any of your family and friends. It really does help us out, and we always appreciate any interaction and support.
Indeed. All right, let's hop right into this.
Yep. So this final 3-parter is going to be focusing on Sherry and Gigi. The past 2, we've been talking about Christopher in his early years, finding out that he was going to become a father when Lorelai got pregnant at 16, how he dealt with that. Part 2 dealt with, everything and anything between seasons 1 and the revival. But this week, we're really just closing it out, focusing on how he fathered Gigi, how he dealt with Sherry leaving and abandoning him and his child, and just going through all of that.
Exactly. Let's start from the beginning and start with presenting Lorelai Gilmore, where we finally find out that he's seeing someone new. And, obviously we see Chris roll up in the Volvo. And he tells Lorelai that he has a job and he actually likes the structure and the stability and, having a place to go every day, feeling like he's accomplished something and earned something for himself. He finds that this sort of stability actually looks good on him. And she thinks so too. And her finding out that he's got a girlfriend now is a bit of a sting to her. But I say that, Sherry was a net positive, I think, for Christopher and his maturation process, because I think being with him finally gave him appropriate expectations for an adult relationship. And I could see her being the type who enforced healthy boundaries as well. And, I think she was just supportive and offered him motivation to show up as his best self. He makes clear in that episode that Sherry was a huge reason that he was finally starting to get it together. And it goes to show that when you have responsibilities and expectations and structure in your life, it can lead to positive outcomes. Lorelai viewed him as a hopeless cause when clearly he wasn't. And maybe if someone had made him do this sooner, he would have advanced through this process even faster. And obviously, Sherry talks to Lorelai about, how much Christopher talks about Rory and how much he seems to love her. And, it really makes her want to bond with Rory. But it makes me wonder, and other people wonder, was Chris just trying to play the good dad card in this early phase of his relationship with Sherry? Like, did he go to the Deb ball to show up for Rory to impress his new girlfriend that like he was really showing up for his daughter? Or do you think his intentions were purer than that?
Again, I'm going to say both. I feel like Sherry was not Lorelai. I'll say that. She was, I feel like, the type of woman who was going to be looking closely at any partner to see how successful are they career-wise, how self-sufficient are they, and how do they interact with family and the people that are close to them in life. And I think she was going to be examining Chris through a finer lens in that regard than maybe Lorelai would have. So I feel like Chris innately probably felt a need to put forth that effort to keep Sherry, it sounds bad to say keep Sherry interested, but just to show, hey, I've got a lot going for me. I can be a good father figure. Maybe he was already considering, oh, what if I am going to have a child one day with this woman? I obviously want to be transparent about the fact that I already have a kid, but I want to show her that the child that I already have is, one that I interact with positively, that I am there for, that I'm not an absent father. So you wouldn't have to worry about that if we were to have, a kid together. So I think it was just setting a good example for any sort of future that they might have together. And it meant using Rory in a way for that. And I hate even using that word, but I feel like that was a part of it. in terms of the debutante ball, I think like Chris, again, we've talked about this. He's not the worst human being in the entire world. So I think had the stars aligned and he had the free time to do so, I feel like he would have still been there because he grew up in that sort of world. You know, he's not like, what's a debutante ball? This is stupid. Like, he wasn't going to pull a Dean and be like, I have to wear a tux. Like, oh my gosh. I think he would have been there, but I think he was just more motivated to do so because it was going to look good to Sherry.
That is fair. I tend to agree with all of that. Like, I like to think that his sentiments were honest and that he did view Rory as an important part of his life. Whether he's the most there for her, I think she always exists in the back of his head a little bit. And even when he's not there, I think he does carry still some guilt and some thought for her. It's easy to assume that he's just a narcissist who's too self-involved to think of his daughter, but I think that's a massive simplification and just heaping a negative assumption onto him where there's really no evidence for that. It's just kind of another way to assume he's a jackass. And, I like to give people a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt. But, I think something that people don't really talk about is the other side of this coin, which is Sherry herself. I'm guessing that Chris speaks very highly of Lorelai based on the interactions that we see Sherry have with Lorelai. Like in It Should Have Been Lorelai, when they first met, she says, "You're just as amazing as Christopher said you were." And Lorelai's like, "Yeah, he's a great judge of character." And so, yeah, he clearly thinks highly of her and speaks highly of her and of Rory. She was his first love. She had his first baby. And so maybe now Sherry has a bit of a complex about this woman, and it makes her hyper intense. Like, her personality is that like type A control freak. And I think maybe thoughts of Lorelai maybe bring up some insecurities for her. And because that whole conversation in the kitchen is kind of awkward. A lot of people are just like, man, Sherry is cringe in that scene. Like, she's just so weird and intense. And I'm like, I think it is just a circumstance. And I think she's just trying to be clear and direct with Lorelai. She's trying to get the lay of the land. And one thing that I really appreciate about that scene is that she talks to Lorelai about wanting to get to know Rory. She approaches the parent first and is like, are you comfortable with this? Like, Chris talks about her all the time. Our relationship is getting really serious. He wants me to bond with her. I think it's important because of what we have coming up. Is that okay with you? And I'm like, who didn't do that later in the series? Spoilers for a future episode on Lucas Atat. And Lorelai's rolling all of that. But, she puts herself in what can feel like an awkward situation as a way of breaking bread and getting over the wall of awful, if you will, in terms of facilitating a relationship, not only with Christopher's daughter, but also her mother, so that their relationship is all copacetic going forward. And I think it might be just as important to Sherry to prove to Chris that she is mommy material and wifey material as it is for Chris to prove to Sherry that he's got his shit together. So I think it's maybe like a little bit of both where, Sherry has a clear sense of what she wants, and she wants a guy who's going to be, dad material for her kid. But she also has to prove herself and her worth to people. There might be some sort of insecurity there because it's just like, you were in an 11-year relationship and you never got married and you never had kids in that. Like, what? I don't know, but it's just.
Yeah, I definitely think it was going both ways. And I think it was, I would agree that it was Sherry, highlighting that she could be mom material again, with her and Chris, having a kid on the horizon, if that were to be a thing. But just going back to what you said about how Chris speaks so highly of Lorelai and, by extension, Rory, Sherry probably picked up very early on that if I want to be a part of Christopher's life, I'm going to have to be okay with being a part of Lorelai and Rory's life. They're a package deal. I can't expect to get into a relationship with this man and pursue marriage with him and a future with him, but then say, I have zero interest in ever getting to know your kid from a previous marriage. It probably would have been a deal breaker for Chris. Sherry probably knew that. And so she was like, I'm going to have to make this effort whether I want to or not. But obviously, I think she was very much okay with that effort. She wasn't, some evil stepmother who was just like, oh, no, like, I'm going to Cinderella her once, this is signed, sealed, and delivered. But I think she understood the importance of putting forth that effort because your future with Chris is going to be dependent on it.
Excellent point. And another interesting thing about that conversation is Sherry tells Lorelai that Chris told her that he wasn't really a presence in Rory's life for years, and now he'd like to make up for all the time that he wasted. And, she's admitting to the fact that she's so pleased with the fact that he's obsessive about his call dates with her, and, that she sees him being a good dad and she finds that endearing, and she wants to be a part of that special bond. And even Lorelai admits, like, he's been doing really well lately. So it seems like everybody is sort of like getting along here. It's weird. It's a little ako taco, but it's kind of a nice moment. And I think it's sort of overstated. Machen Amic's performance is very like high strung. Mm-hmm. And so it makes it feel kind of weird. But if you kind of just read it, it's actually quite a sweet moment. But Lorelai just has to go and make it awkward because it's Lorelai.
But yeah. But again, just case in point, I think it was really nice how both of them were putting forth that effort. Lorelai, obviously, you could tell, was just a little bit uncomfortable about it, as was Rory. We'll get to, the birth. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about, the shower and the lead up and what went on there. But I think that's also a very normal thing, especially for Rory. You're getting a stepmom. You're also trying to wrap your head around the fact that you're going to have a sibling, for the first time in your life when you've always been an only child up until this point. That's a massive change. So I think there is going to be, some periods of just uncomfortability, but it's just stemming from, again, adjusting to that new reality.
Totally. I guess that brings us to the end of season 2. The big dramatic moment. Chris and Lorelai are so close to getting together, and then life gets in the way. And yeah, it's really unfortunate. A lot of people look at the end of season 2, I think, as proof that he's always going to disappoint them. But the flip side of that I don't hear people talking about is the fact that, like, obviously we are rooting for Lorelai and Rory, and some people at that point were rooting for Lorelai and Chris. They like the idea of the whole biological family getting together. It's got its appeal. And we don't really care about Sherry. We've only met her like once. She's a blip on the radar. She's just an obstacle for them to get over. But, if you think about it, it's not so much Chris just leaving Rory and Lorelai again. I made the point last week where it's like, it's not like he took off to Vegas and just, decided to move there to, dawdle his time away and gamble his life savings. He made an active choice to be a husband and a father in a way that was not provided to him when he was younger. So the flip side of this whole situation is him stepping up to support his girlfriend and his new baby the way he wanted to do for Lorelai all those years ago. Would it be better for him to leave this woman alone, to do it on her own, to make the difficult choice to either go the pregnancy alone or terminate? Like, would we have been any easier on him if he, like, what if he had stayed with Lorelai and Rory? How would we feel about him ditching Sherry? Honestly, we probably wouldn't care because we'd be like, she's probably just gonna like have a schmishmorshin and call it a day, and we'll never hear about her ever again because that's how the writers on this show work. But I don't think we would have been any gentler on him if he had abandoned another woman and another child. We would have just been like, I can't believe Lorelai's with this guy. Why is she giving him all these chances when he's just clearly like not a good guy, not a good dad? It's, do we only feel this way because we like Lorelai and Sherry is a romantic opponent to her? Why is it wrong for him to commit himself to being a loving husband and father? It's just, it's a rock and a hard place, and everyone treats it like he shot Lorelai and Rory, like it was just an immature, impulsive, I can't do this, sorry, bye. When that's not the case at all. He had a very difficult decision to make, and his choice was follow my heart for the teenage love of my life, or do I step up? Do I be a man? Do I provide for this child? Do I get to experience having a child? Because he was saying in season 1 to Lorelai, he's like, what if I never have another kid? And Lorelai's like, you have decades left to spawn, you're fine. And now here it is on a silver platter, another child. He gets a do-over, and in a way I think he made the right decision. I mean, obviously we have the benefit of hindsight that it doesn't ultimately work out, but I think that there is still some nobility in what he decided to do here, even though Lorelai and Rory were hurt in the process. But I've said this before and I'll say it again. Lorelai had her shot multiple times. She had her shot when she was 16, 17. She had it last year when he showed up and was like, I want to marry you. I want to be a family. And then all of a sudden he gets a girlfriend and gets his life together, and she's jealous and things are finally going well. But it's like, it was a matter of months difference. He didn't fundamentally reconstitute himself into a whole new human being between Christopher Returns and presenting Lorelai Gilmore. This is the same guy, and we see him doing well and making good decisions and right decisions and stepping up and being a good dad, or at least a better dad. And Richard calls it out in the season 3 opener when Lorelai tells them the bad news that they're not together anymore. It's just like, Christopher is living up to his responsibilities. He's doing the right thing, just like he offered to do with Lorelai all those years ago. I'm not surprised by this. Y'all are naive. He's doing what he should do because that's the right thing to do in this situation. And, while I don't necessarily agree with Richard's tone, I think he's got a point where it's just like, Christopher is trying to do right by Sherry and by this new child, and he's doing his best to provide for them in the way that he knows how.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like, just to play devil's advocate, and I'm not saying that I, agree with this stance, but maybe, the fan base just does have so much bent out of shapeness about it because the idea of them getting back together had been so well entertained up until that point. And we were kind of being led to believe that it was going to be a possibility. And so we started rooting for them for it because of how much we love Lorelai and because of how much it would seemingly mean to Rory to have her biological father present and back in her life. But that doesn't always mean that's how life is going to shake out. It's, again, just, cliches, but life is like a box of chocolates, folks. You never know what you're going to get. And in this instance, obviously a child is now resulting from this union with Sherry, and Chris is having to reckon with that and make a choice. Like you said, do I follow my head or do I follow my heart here? And I think the choice he made was a really good one in that moment. Gigi, or just any child, deserves to have, a stable family unit, a 2-parent household. We've talked about how that can be really beneficial for any child or young person. He was stepping up to the plate here, and I think it's really commendable that he was doing so, even though it was going to mean, hurting Lorelai and hurting Rory again. But they were going to have to find a way to process that on their own, work through it, and still try and just be supportive for Chris, because that's what I think he deserves in that moment. Whether or not, again, most of the fan base agrees with that, it was the right call.
That is an excellent point I hadn't really considered before, that maybe people are just a little bit disappointed and frustrated that there had been all this sort of build up and expectation created and then subverted. They were expecting to see her at least give things a shot with Christopher, maybe. And then there was just sort of that wah wah of, oh boy, he's just disappointing them again, even though he hasn't again, we've been told that he's disappointed them in the past, but we've never really seen it.
Mm-hmm.
At least not to the extent that people like to portray up to this point. By this point, the worst thing he's done is try to buy Rory a very expensive book without blinking and having his credit card denied because he probably has ADHD and didn't check his statement. But the other thing that I thought of while you were talking there was, again, the head versus heart thing. And in a way, following his heart to Lorelai is one thing, but there's also a possibility that he's following his heart towards being a dad as well. And, he could obviously be a dad to Rory, but by this point she's 17, she's only got another year of high school before she's out of the house. He's missed the bulk of her young life, and it's not the same experience. Whereas with Sherry, even if she's not the love of his life, I think he desires the idea of fatherhood enough to be like, even if I wouldn't in other circumstances choose Sherry, like, and again, this kind of sucks. Like, this is the crappy part of it, is the relationship with Sherry and just the sort of the fact that it's so unfortunate that they were maybe not a good couple. But the fact that he chose being a father over someone he's loved most of his life, I think that speaks to his internal desires to be a dad and to be a good dad. I think that's a very revealing decision for him to make. If he really truly was just sort of like gunning to get Lorelai and using Rory to get there, why would he choose Sherry and Gigi over Lorelai and Rory? If that was his only goal and he was willing to do whatever it took to achieve it, why make that choice to be a dad to a new baby?
Excellent point. And I dare anyone listening to argue it.
Seriously, we dare you in the comments below. Let's go.
We'll fight you. This is what we want.
Yeah. All right. So now we have the baby shower. Let's move on to that. Mm-hmm. That is such a beloved episode for me. The devil egging Jess's car will never not be funny.
Mm-hmm.
But, for the Sherry of it all, I do love the conversation that they have sort of off to the side when they're refilling their plates. And Sherry just sings his praises. She's like, he's been amazing the past few months. So involved. He talks to it every night. He sings to it, even though he has a terrible voice. He's so protective. He's, he's attentive and excited. That's the thing. It's like, you can tell that he's excited by her telling this story. We hear a different perspective of Christopher from, a third party, another lens on him that we don't get through Lorelai and Rory, kind of the same way we did in the pilot when we were hearing about him through Richard instead of, directly comparing him or thinking about him as it pertains to Lorelai. And so, at first she wasn't sure how he was going to react. They were going through a rough patch, and despite all of that, and despite what happened in Stars Hollow when they were on their break to figure things out, he went back to her, and he was a devoted partner and a devoted dad. And, obviously we see Lorelai spiral here. That's good times, rearranging her medicine cabinet.
It's not passive aggressive at all.
Super mature. We love that for her. And so, she thought about, not only did she think about going it alone with this pregnancy, but she thought about going it alone before she met Christopher as well. And that's the other thing, is at that party is like all the other women were like, there aren't that many Christophers in the world. Like, they can see the value and the care and the attention that he pays to Sherry, and they're jealous of her and her relationship with this guy. Like, they see him in a way that Lorelai was never able to see him, and you can tell that she leaves that party just emotionally destroyed.
Yeah. I just want to not tangentialize on this too briefly, and I've this is an example that I've highlighted as a film who just, I think, did this really well in the past. But just going off of what you said about Sherry considering doing this alone, it just makes me think again of Jennifer Garner's performance in Juno, where at the end of that film, spoilers, uh, she ends up kicking her husband out of the house and adopting this child and pursuing single motherhood. And her reasoning behind it is because her husband is just an immature jerk. And one of the lines in the movie like that she says is she's like, if I am ready to be a mother. I am at that stage. I am ready to take on this responsibility. It is something that I so much desire and want for myself. But if I have to wait for you to be ready to be a father, it will literally never happen because you will just never get there. You can't grow up. And so it just also made me think of maybe even some of early on, like, again, we've talked about this in parts 1 and 2, go back and watch it, but just of Lorelai and Christopher's early interactions where Lorelai was going to have to be ready to be a mother, whether she wanted to or not, because she was choosing to continue on with the pregnancy and have this kid. Christopher didn't seem like he was ready to be a father at that point in time. And he was going to have to step up to the plate, if that's how it would have panned out. But I really just don't think he was ready for fatherhood. Now with Sherry, he is. And he's grown up and he's had like that stage of growth. And we have seen it in him. And Sherry is noticing it and she is so appreciative of it. And that's why I think she's thanking Lorelai for it, because in her mind, the relationship that Chris has had with Lorelai and Rory up until this point has allowed him to get to that point where now he can actively be a really good father to this baby that's coming and to Sherry as a partner in terms of raising this child.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I feel like in the first part when we were talking about Chris's teen years and sort of how this all came to be and how we got where we are and all the attitudes of everyone involved, I don't think I hit hard enough on the point that, like, dude was 17 when this happened. Like, think about yourself at 17. Would you have been ready to step up? Think about Jess and think about Dean. We give them so much grace. I mean, some people are haters without kind of remembering that these are teenage boys. But when we're giving them the benefit of the doubt, we shower them with grace, with like, they can't even handle a fairly simple situation. Imagine finding out that you're going to be a dad at 17 and it's just like, I'm not ready for this. Are you ready? I'm not ready for this. What? It's just like, I feel like it's hypocritical of people to be like, well, you should have just stepped up. Like, I think it's just so the height of hubris to assume that we would have behaved any differently or any better, or that we, unless you are, a teen parent or a young parent, to know what that's like at all, and to say with gusto that you wouldn't be terrified, that you wouldn't make a different decision, like, or wouldn't make the same decision, that you wouldn't, like, yeah, that you wouldn't know how to handle that. I just think it's, we pile it all on Christopher. He gets the brunt of everything. He gets all of the blame, even when he's not the only player in it. Like, and the same goes for Sherry. He gets a lot of the blame in the later seasons, which we'll get to in a minute. But like, I don't know. I felt like I had to backtrack a little bit and reiterate just how difficult this whole thing must have been for him, and how much he is disproportionately judged and burdened and blamed by everyone, both in universe and in the fandom. So anyway,
Yeah.
Let's talk about Dear Emily. Or you finish up.
Yeah, no, what I was about to say, and it just boils down to that you are going to be expecting a child to be raising a child. Yes. That's it. But let's move on.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Like, it's not easy to be a parent. It's not easy to have those skills and to expect a 17-year-old boy to just be like, yeah, let's effing go. No, just get out of here with that. Anyone who does that is extremely lucky. And, well, not lucky, but any young teen mom whose dad steps up like that, like the parent of their child steps up like that, is probably an aberration. And, they're lucky. And sometimes that's just genuinely not the case. And it's very difficult for everyone involved.
Yep.
So I feel like we have to look at Lorelai a little more closely in all of this, because she's the one who was driving this car all the way from Hartford to Stars Hollow. And it's just like, I'm not saying we need to blame her or judge her. I'm not saying that her decisions were mistakes, but she made the choices. That's her right and her prerogative as a woman and a mother. And it's okay, but she's got to live with the consequences. Anyway, Gigi's birth. Dear Emily and Richard. Chris is like, I must have broken 15 different laws getting here. Dude hauls it to the hospital to be there for the birth of his daughter. Whereas, when Lorelai gave birth, she didn't even call her parents. She just like somehow got herself to the hospital and was like, I'm going to do this by myself. Like, I don't need any of y'all. Hell, I probably don't even need a doctor. I can do that. I could totally deliver my own baby. That's big Lorelai energy. And so the fact that like we see Christopher being devoted and excited and busting his butt to be a good birth partner for Sherry. Like, clearly she goes into labor early. Nobody was expecting this. He was on the road, but he drops everything and makes it to the birth. And then we see just like that stark contrast between them looking in at Gigi versus Rory. And, Christopher's just excitement and exuberance is shining through, where he's like, oh, Lord, my wildest dreams I never could have imagined. I've never been that nervous or terrified or nauseous in my entire life. It was like the most amazing thing in the world. It was like, well,
Mm-hmm.
He says he's flying, he's so, so happy. And he's clearly, he's in this, even if it wasn't his first choice. And it kind of came out of a slightly awkward situation or undesirable situation. He is in this. And I applaud that, because, if you look at how browbeaten he was in the flashback version of that, he's just like, well, I'm, you're emotionally blocking me out and I can't be excited about this, because it's just sort of like, this is a problem to solve. And, that's the hard part about judging his relationship with Rory, is like the context from which she came is so emotionally fraught for everyone. It's hard for him not to feel bad and guilty about her conception and his parenting of her in those early years. Like, how else is he supposed to feel? Like, he's carried that for 17 years. And I just can't imagine how hard that would be for him.
Yeah, and you make an excellent point. He can be excited about this child now in a way that he never could with Rory, because Sherry let him in, and she let him be a part of the process, in the months leading up to it. Again, singing to the child, maybe reading at books every single night. Like, he was already able to develop that emotional attachment to his new daughter in a way that he never could with Rory. And so on, game day, so to say, when Gigi comes into the world, he has that connection already established that allows him to be that much more excited and just over the moon about this new, wonderful, beautiful daughter of his that's in his life. And that's why, like, I just love the moment where it's definitely hurtful for Lorelai in terms of just flashing back to that moment that she had with him when Rory was born. But he's looking in and just seeing Gigi and just seeing, like, I have this perfect new daughter in my life now. And he's feeling that way again because Sherry let him in a way that Lorelai never did.
Exactly. Oh, well, that's the last time things are good.
Spoilers.
Yeah, the last time he's excited and happy. Again, oh, going back to what we talked about last week with like Chris not going to graduation. I mean, obviously Lorelai cites him traveling as part of this, but like, let's also recall he has a wife and daughter and a life and a job and all of these things. And it's like, you know, do you go straight home to your postpartum wife, or do you go to your daughter's high school graduation? Like, he must feel so torn in so many different directions. And you know, I think he wants to do it and do it all, but you know, their relationship over the last year has been probably more sporadic and more difficult with the fact that he's raising an infant.
Yeah, an excellent point. I hadn't really thought of like the you now have people that you are needing to come home to at the end of every single day thing. I think was more tied up in, well, if it's your job, like, you know, when graduation day is, try and like, make arrangements with work. But it is a very different thing and something to be considered when you have people that actually expect you home at the end of every night. So
yeah, people who depend on you too financially. And, you know, some jobs are more flexible than others. It sounds like his work has him on the road all the time and he can't constantly say, oh, I have to take this day off and this day off. You know, it's like, I got a doctor's appointment, I got a high school graduation, you know. This is another thing that's really interesting, and I don't really have a lot of like data or research on this at the moment. I'll have to do some more digging into this, but like just the difference in, you know, paternal leave and the expectations at work for men and women and how much men are given time off to do family stuff. Like, you know, most of us have jobs where we can't just take off every 5 minutes just because we want to, you know? And it seems like Chris is making his own way. He's not seemingly making a ton of money. Sherry is probably off work from the sounds of it, staying home to raise the kid. And so Chris is their sole breadwinner. And, you know, that's nothing to sneeze at. That's kind of a big deal. And if his company is reliant upon him to fulfill his role, if there's nobody else who can cover for him, it's not like an office where you have a whole team of people who can just take your spot. It doesn't work like that. Sometimes if you have to go on a trip, you have to go on a trip. And not every trip is planned out in advance. Some things are emergencies, you know? Like, I have a feeling that he was initially slated to go, and then something came up that he just, like, could not brush off because, like, the business world doesn't just wait around for you to, like, deal with stuff sometimes. And it's really unfortunate. I'm not saying this is a good thing. This is one of the effed up things about capitalism that we really need to look at. But what I'm saying is he may not have had much of a choice. So to put it on him as like he just didn't care enough about his daughter's graduation to even show up, that may just be a gross oversimplification of the situation.
Agreed. And also just because maternal and paternal leave, both of them within America, we're doing so super great with it over here.
Yeah.
We're so generous with new parents. It's amazing.
Y'all are killing it. You have so much paid maternity leave. 6 weeks is an eternity.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I'm surprised we're not asking mothers to go back to work, 48 hours later.
No comment. The other thing I would like to point out about this whole situation, and I think I've said this before, but Christopher is Richard.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like he is the breadwinner, sole provider, travels a lot for work. And again, we're a lot easier on Richard than we are on Chris, probably because we see Richard in his later years and Lorelai is grown up and taking care of herself. But what was her childhood like, not having her dad around most of the time because he was on the road? He didn't truly know her and she didn't truly know him. And I think that's kind of a similar situation that we've got now with Chris and Gigi in season 5. And I think the show might, well, I don't know if I want to give them this much credit, but I'm going to be nice and do it anyway. I think maybe the show is trying to make a point that like dads who work nonstop and don't know their kids and don't take an active role, like Richard and now Christopher. Like, that's not the model we should be emulating. That's not what we should be holding up as the standard. And this is maybe a messed up thing that we need to look at.
Yeah, I agree. I think there has been movement forward in that regard, but there's still a lot of work to be done there. And I will just say that.
Yeah. Okay, that brings us to, I think it's Norman Mailer, I'm pregnant in season 5, when Lorelai frantically calls Christopher frantically calls Lorelai because Gigi won't stop crying and he needs her help. And she's like, what's going on? He's like, Sherry's not here and the nanny's gone and I need help. And so she shows up. And, you know, Sherry has left. Chris has very little support system. You know, most of his friends are Sherry's friends. She is the heart of their social home. She's the one who's been, you know, dictating the relationships and the location of their home and all of that kind of stuff, it seems. He moved his life to join her life, and that's what he got. And so he really doesn't have any like close friends, especially not any who are parents who know what to do to help him. Not only is he left holding the entire bag, and the entire bag is full of poopy diapers, but he's lost his partner too. This woman that he spent the last 3 years with is suddenly gone from his life, with the only remnants being a vaguely apologetic letter being like, peace out, bro, I'm in France. Like, It's just horrible and sad. And that whole conversation he has with Lorelai where he's like, I can't do this. And she's like, yes, you can. You know, if I had taken off to Europe and joined the Bangles, you would have stepped up and you would have raised Rory. I believe you can do this. Like, you just, like, you're going to do it because you have to. Because that's what she did, right? She pushed her way through and made it happen. And she's not wrong that that's just kind of what you got to do. You have to, you know, trust yourself, trust your instincts, do what you can, learn what you can. But, you know, Chris is sitting there being like, I can't do this. You're special. You're Superwoman. You're stronger than I am. I can't live up to that. And she has to be a cheerleader for him in that moment. And again, I love that moment because it feels like the first time that Lorelai acknowledges the fact that, like, yes, Chris is capable of parenting. And I think she retroactively realizes, like, yeah, if something had gone differently, he would have raised this kid. And I like that she's finally acknowledging that, like, maybe she was wrong about him.
Yeah. I mean, it's heartbreaking for Chris in that moment too. Because again, just you have to try and put yourself in this character's shoes. Your partner, whom you at this point probably envisioned maybe spending the rest of your life with, pieced out on you and your kid. Emotional devastation, you know, that's going to take a long time to recover from. And on top of that, you know, we've talked about in the past few weeks how Chris, I think, was always in this mindset of, why even bother attempting anything or trying anything? Because I'm just going to fail. My father always thinks I'm going to fail. My mother always thinks I'm going to fail. Even Lorelai, at multiple occasions, has always just thought, like, he's just going to fail. Everyone always thinks I'm going to fall on my ass. So he developed this mindset of, I can't be successful or good at anything. I'm just doomed for failure. And so that probably crossed over into parenthood as well, where when he's having a tough time with Gigi, because, again, your partner's gone, the nanny's gone, your kid's feeling under the weather, you're stressed out, you're still devastated from that abandonment. He probably just, that mindset came flashing back of, like, I can't do it. And that's where, like you said, he needed Lorelai to step in and just be like, yes, you actually can. And I will be here with you this evening to help you, you know, allow Gigi to feel better, you know, but you've got this, so to say. And it was good for him to hear, but it's truthful, because it really does take a village to raise a kid. You know, the picture gets painted, like we've alluded to, of Lorelai being Superwoman for going it alone, but she did have help. And anyone who is raising a child at some point in time, even if it's, single parenthood, you're going to be reliant on family, friends, whomever to step in and help you with that kid, because it is just one of, I think, like, the world, like, it's just a massive undertaking.
Yeah, again, nothing to sneeze at. It's not something that should ever be entered into lightly. Um, I very much think that parenting should be an affirmative choice, not a default option. I don't think it should be expected that everyone should be parents, and I don't think that, like, oops, got knocked up is like a good enough reason to have a kid, because there are some really terrible parents out there that are doing terrible damage to their children, and it's really sad to see. And I don't think that's the case here. But also, another good point you made was about needing Lorelai to help him. And I love that she does show up and says, you know, I'm here to support you and Rory's here to support you. Like, we've got this. But it also reinforces the fact that Christopher needs a lot of external validation because of these insecurities, the constant, insults and failures he's faced, or perceived failures, especially coming from his own parents. So he has no internal sense of competence with any of this. And so he really does need an outside voice. And that's just super sad. But another thing about this situation that really gets me is, like, mentioned it before a couple times in this particular series and other times as well. The writers are just really inconsistent with this character, with Sherry. They're willing to write Chris and Sherry in whatever way accomplishes the desired drama for the particular episode, and then they'll just throw it away the minute they want something else to happen. Because, in season 2, we're introduced to Sherry as this, like, woman who really wants to be a mom. She even talks to Rory about it the first time they hang out together. Like, just the fact that, she has a timeline and plans for having kids. And, now that I think about it, Sherry being pregnant is actually one of the most unbelievable things on the show, because you don't think a type A biznatch like that would, like, be on birth control to make sure she can control the exact timing that she has kids. Like, she was contemplating it before Chris came along, but, does this mean that, like, she went off the pill anticipating getting pregnant in a couple of months and it just happened faster than she thought? Again, if she is that, like, if she has that strict of plans and, she books her cesarean and all of these things, you would think that she would be in control of conception, and that they wouldn't be dumb enough to use the pull-out method.
Okay.
Unless they just felt like playing with fire that day. I don't know. But, like, it doesn't track with Sherry's personality, right? And so that's where, like, her being pregnant is just sort of like a plucked from thin air excuse for drama, and, keeping Lorelai and Chris apart again. So I don't know. It's like, and the other consideration here is a woman who wants kids so badly that she was considering single parenthood before Chris came along, and she leaves her 2-year-old to move to Paris right as Luke and Lorelai are getting into a relationship, no less. Like, again, it's so inconsistent with what they've said about this character in the past, and it goes to show that she is a plot device, not a person. And so I guess that begs the question, why do you think Sherry left?
Yeah. I will say this. I want to give the character of Sherry the benefit of the doubt, because we don't see what those first 2 years of motherhood were like for her. If she was suffering from severe postpartum, maybe she thought that she was going to be able to handle and tackle motherhood, but the sleepless nights weighed on her. It was affecting her career. She was no longer feeling fulfilled, like she could, do a good job at work, and it started affecting her emotional, mental well-being. Maybe she developed resentment for her child for that. There are so many things that could have gone on that we're just not privy to. So if she was really just trying to work through all of that and just couldn't, I'm not saying that it excuses abandoning your child, but maybe there were underlying reasons and things that she was genuinely contending with and going through that she needed help with, but she didn't know how to seek or obtain that help, what to do about it, and she just defaulted to leaving.
Yeah. I think in Sherry's case, especially, like, a lot of people think of kids as something to check off a list. You know, it's like, oh, I'm going to grow up, I'm going to get married, I'm going to have a job, and I'm going to get pregnant or have a kid. It feels like one of those life markers that you have to accomplish. It's, yeah, most kids play with baby dolls or some variation of that. They play house, they play mommy. And I think Sherry falls into that camp. And she didn't necessarily think about her priorities. I think it was expected of her also. You know, like society expects women to want to be mothers and to be good ones when they do it, but that's just not the reality. And we see how driven she is when it comes to her career and how much she loves it and how much girl bossing just fills her cup, right? And I don't know that parenting did the same for her. And she didn't expect that. So the fact that Christopher was traveling a lot for work meant that she was maybe doing a lot more of the parenting than she thought. Like, I remember at the baby shower when she's like, oh, she's all mine when she has the legs to dance, but Christopher's the baby person. But then she's the one left parenting because the baby is reliant on her, especially if she's breastfeeding. And, you know, it's just Christopher doesn't have parental leave. Like, you know, paternity leave is probably not really much of a thing at that point. And so, you know, Sherry probably would have only got a minimal amount from her work. And that leads me to believe that she had to quit entirely. And it meant that she wasn't getting fulfillment that she needed. And that's what she cites in her letter to him, being like, I've put my career on hold for 2 years. It's your turn now. And so it's one of those things where it's like someone has to give up their job and raise the kid. And she didn't want it to be her. And, you know, it's
just sad because it definitely seems like Sherry and Chris needed to have had a much more serious and in-depth conversation about parenthood before they voluntarily or otherwise decided to go that route. We don't know if Sherry was just an oopsie baby. We don't know if she was planned. But regardless, if you're even considering parenthood, that needs to be an extensive conversation between two people. And it seems like they never had it. Perhaps there was you know, going back to what you said, like this idealization of like, you know, we're going to get married, we're going to love each other forever, we're going to have a kid, I'm going to be a great mom, you're going to be a great dad, everything is just going to align and it's going to be, you know, blissful for the rest of our lives. That's not how parenthood works. And again, that's where that conversation definitely, I think, needed to have been had between them. It doesn't seem like it was. And for as well prepared as Sherry thought that she might have been entering into motherhood, she probably was just blindsided by the actual reality of it and what it took away from her life and her own goals and aspirations. And therefore, I don't think she was ready to be a mother, even though she might have thought that she was. And it's disastrous because you've done lifelong irreparable damage to your daughter now.
Yeah, I mean, they probably would have been better off being child-free. But again, those societal expectations of like, why aren't you a mom yet? How dare you not be a mother? I think that maybe was not so subtly ingrained in her entire life.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, she couldn't handle it. And you know, Chris sort of puts the blame on himself. He's like, I'm always gone, I barely know her. And I think that makes people think that he's sort of responsible for her leaving, that like he never did anything to help or anything to contribute to the childcare. And I'm just like, how is he supposed to do that if he's the one traveling for work because he can't get parental leave? Like, we don't know what their financial situation was like. We don't know whether he made more money in his job than her, and so it made more sense for him to be working. I mean, granted, she was an exec at a major cosmetics brand, but we don't know what he's doing. Tech bros make big money. And so, like, it could have just been a practicality where it was just like, it just makes sense for me to keep my job and her to quit hers, at least until the kid's in school. And, you know, I think what gets me the most about it, though, is just the stark. This is skipping ahead a little, but in season 6, rather, when Gigi's having all the behavioral problems and can't get into preschools and stuff, Chris is sort of like, the single parent thing is really hard. And Lorelai's like, yeah, it's fun, huh? And he's like, I never really understood how you felt about me until right now. I want to kill Sherry. And I'm like, these are not the same situations. This is absolutely not apples to apples, okay? This is like apples to coffee makers. Like, when Lorelai and Chris got pregnant, they were children. They weren't even able to vote yet. And they had to make tough calls. And in that vein, Chris didn't even really get to make a decision. Lorelai made that call for him, and her parents made that call for her of like, termination is not an option, right? But in this case, this is two 30-year-olds who consciously made the choice to go through with a pregnancy. This is a woman who previously made a conscious choice to be a parent. This was what she wanted, or what she thought she wanted. And then she up and left. It was way worse than what Chris did. Like, Chris was a child who was left floundering and knew nothing about the world. Sherry is a competent, put together, motivated woman who left her 2-year-old daughter with her father, who has to travel for work all the time, because she wanted to take a job in Paris.
Yep.
I can't even, like, what Chris did in comparison to that, like, I don't even know if I can call Chris selfish for not being around for Rory in those early years, because we genuinely don't know what he tried or what he didn't try to be a part of her life. And I wouldn't have put it past Lorelai to not actively block him, but just sort of like never work to make it happen for them. Whereas Sherry had resources and know-how and all kinds of things that like could have kept Chris more in the loop. And it just, the fact that she left her child and her husband, that is selfish. What Chris did was self-preservation and was a trauma response. Like,
I concur. That's just very well said. I don't even want to add anything to it, because that's just the whole self-preservation versus self-centeredness. Yep. That's what it was.
Okay, kids, I think the moral of the story here is like, be very intentional with your life choices and like really truly think them out, because there is no turning back with a decision like parenting. And if it does happen to you, you have to make a very conscious choice to either partake in it or to put the child up for adoption, or if you must, terminate. At least, if that is an option for you and that's the way you want to go, like, you shouldn't be made to feel bad that you're not in a place where you can parent, because you'll probably just do more damage to the child by not being ready to be the best parent that you can be. And so I think that Sherry is sort of like a cautionary tale of the person who thought that they wanted kids and then regretted it. And it's just, it's so hard. And so I guess that kind of brings us to like Gigi's slightly older years, when she's 3 and 4. And Chris is solo parenting, and he's having trouble saying no because he feels bad that she doesn't have a mother. He's saying, I want her to be happy, I don't want her to feel like she's missing out on anything. All she has is me. What a super bargain that is. He feels very inadequate in his parenting without her. And then we have, season 7 where she's moved in with Lorelai, and then she shuttled off to Paris, and then she shuttled back from Paris. And so, the impact on Gigi here is definitely something worth talking about as well, because, Chris is right. She doesn't have a mother figure, at least until Lorelai's around, and until Sherry finally comes around and says, bring her to Paris. Like, I want her to visit me. So what are your thoughts about all of this and the impact on Gigi all this time?
It's heartbreaking because I'm like, I have such compassion for any child who has to work through even like any sort of their adolescence, but especially those young formative years without or a mother, a father figure present, any sort of two-parent household when it is so needed. And that is why Gigi was lashing out and misbehaving. It wasn't because she was a bad young person. It was just because, first off, her father didn't discipline her in an appropriate manner because, like you said, I think he was just so broken for her for not having a present mother that he was just willing to bend the rules for her and let her do whatever she wanted. That's not an appropriate response either. You still need to set boundaries with your kid and have rules and expectations for what's appropriate and what's not. But Gigi was definitely struggling with the fact that she had an absent parent. At that point in time as a 3 or 4-year-old, she probably didn't have the scope to understand that like mom chose actively to abandon me. But as she grows up and she becomes privy to that knowledge, like this is going to be something that she is going to struggle with in her preteen years, her teen years, for the rest of her life. Like that knowledge that like my parent actively decided they didn't want to be a part of my life one day and that I didn't matter anymore. This is just, I think, the start of the problems that Gigi is going to have. And so her behavioral patterns here, again, I'm not any sort of professional psychiatrist. I don't know what's going on there, but I think anyone who is could probably explain it even better than I can, that this is just stemming from the absence of a two-parent household and a mother who just up and left one day. And Gigi is not processing that well. She's having also a father who is not processing that well. And so when she really probably needs Christopher to really be present and be there for her to make up for that, he probably is unable to do that himself because he is still just blindsided by the abandonment also.
Absolutely. And, we sort of get a teaser of this a little bit in season 6 from Anna, and we'll talk about her and Luke and all of that more soon. But Anna was reticent to have Lorelai involved in April's life because she was worried that if Luke and Lorelai didn't work out, that April would get attached and Lorelai might not be in her life anymore, and she'll have to deal with that loss of someone that she cares about, right? And that's exactly what we see happen in season 7, and nobody ever acknowledges it. Gigi gets used to having Lorelai around. She lives in her house. She's, auntie, stepmom Lorelai. So to have her presence for so long and then to have that ripped away, after I think the Christmas episode, the Santa's Secret stuff, I don't think we ever see Gigi again. And, the impact on her of all of this is just sort of like, the proof is in the pudding about parental figures coming in and out of your life, and the irony is palpable. Just, once again, swept right under the rug. Nobody ever brings it up ever again, how difficult that must have been for that kid to be shuttled around like that. But, yeah. Overall, I think in season 6 and 7, we see that Chris has really gotten his life together. He's a much more present father to his daughters. He genuinely tries in his relationship with Lorelai, and it still doesn't work out. He's still consistently framed as the bad guy and the loser guy, which kind of distracts from Lorelai's part in all of this and from all of the deeper dynamics at play. But you know, it's nice to see that he really does sort of step up to the plate and do the work to be a dad.
He most certainly does. And that has been the crux of why we wanted to do this 3-part series, was just to illustrate that in our minds, I think we can both collectively say and agree upon the fact that the Christopher Hayden hate within the fandom is not fully unwarranted, but it is exacerbated in a way that I think is just very unfair to the character for reasons that we've highlighted throughout these past 3 weeks. And I think he definitely deserved more grace and more compassion as, just like we've said, a 17-year-old who was just thrown into potential fatherhood without any sort of heads up, who had a very traumatic upbringing, whose parents were probably very neglectful, who probably spent most of his 20s having successes and failures within career paths, broken relationships, trying to get back with his daughter several times and reestablish that, and it not working out. The man did not have an easy part of a decade and a half, so to say. And that's why we should allow for that compassion for him. And especially because he actively continues to put in the work to try and be a better person and grow. And again, it's a very slow process for him, but if that was the time that he needed, then that's the time that he needed. And at the end of the day, we see an arc with Christopher that is not always perfect, that we can and have critiqued, but that is on the upswing as we come into the revival and as this show ends for us.
Yeah, I think a lot of the hate is a little overblown and simplistic and hyperbolic, shall we say. People are just sort of like enraged at the idea. Part of it might be projection on the part of people who have absent father figures in their life. And, you know, in a way, there's some validity to that. But also, you know, this is a TV show. This is a fictional character that was invented by people to have a very particular role in the story. And he's written accordingly, which, you know, is meant to be somewhat true to life and for people to relate to, you know, especially people who have single moms for whatever reason. And I just think that we'll talk about this more, I think, in future, if we do sort of a quote unquote Rory's daddy issues episode. I don't like the term daddy issues because it's usually hurled in misogyny, but there are a lot of reasons that fathers can be absent. And I think a lot of the discourse about absent father figures and daddy issues doesn't take into consideration the rationales and the reasons for it, and the sort of sliding scale, if you will, of the levels of difficulty that people experience because of it. And, you know, I think Christopher is actually, you know, not that offensive if you think about it. Like, no, he's not perfect. He definitely falters several times, and he could have been more present. But, like, he was generally kind, generous, safe, caring, loving, and present when he could be. And, you know, not many dads can say that. But, you know, there are dads who are alienated from their kids because of economic reasons, or, you know, some are incarcerated, some are unstable, some are struggling with addictions, some are struggling with moms who actively keep their kids away from them. There's a whole spectrum of reasons why this could be possible. And so, you know, I don't want to simplify what's a very difficult thing for people and just, you know, call every absent father a deadbeat, and fall into that stereotyping when we can, parse this text and look closely and think about it and analyze it with a critical lens and think, actually, it's not that bad. Like, not that it's not harmful or hurtful at times for them, but in the grand scheme of like the possibilities of terrible fatherhood, Chris isn't actually that bad, comparatively speaking. That's kind of a whole other topic unto itself. But there's something else that I can't believe we haven't talked about yet. Privilege. I think a lot of people expect more out of Chris because of his privilege. But as we've seen through multiple characters on the show, privilege doesn't always equal emotional stability. Just because you might have financial stability or theoretical financial stability doesn't mean that other areas of your life are not extremely difficult to deal with. And, we've sort of dabbled in this question before, but like, we're not sure that Strobe and Francine continued to support Christopher financially through college or through his 20s. They might have cut him off at some point, being like, stand on your own 2 feet now, you loser. Or maybe they were mad about the pregnancy and him consistently getting kicked out of school and him not going to Princeton. Maybe they didn't finance his college. Maybe they rescinded any trust fund that there might have been set up for him because he didn't meet the terms that they set out for it, or they just were not happy with him, or, any other number of petty reasons that his financial situation might have been less stable than we anticipate. And again, look at Lorelai. She well, I mean, maybe not the best example because she gave it up willingly, but like, Lorelai tries not to lean on that privilege. And it kind of seems like Chris is sort of doing the same, at least at the beginning, where he's trying to make it on his own in Silicon Valley. We don't know how that started, how he got there, who paid for that, whether his parents were putting up seed capital for some ridiculous startup. We don't know. But, if he couldn't afford to pay his credit card bill to get that Oxford English Dictionary, what was his financial situation like? Does he really have all the financial privilege? Should he have gone back to his ridiculously abusive parents just because he was strapped for cash? Or can we have some grace for him like we had for Lorelai, where it's just like, you know what? We actually think it's a pretty cool thing that you're not just like taking handfuls of cash from your parents every time you need a new motorcycle. You know what I mean? Like, there's questions to be asked about his privileges, such as they are, and what might have happened to those over the years. Because again, he's not like Logan, where Logan just sort of is totally financed by his parents until he's 25 and he works for his parents' company and the company pays for all the apartments and, he's got a $5 million trust fund. Either Chris blew through his on failed business ventures and he's truly struggling, or maybe he never had it to begin with. We don't actually know because the show doesn't care to answer these questions for us because Christopher is not important to the writers.
Yeah. If I had to pick a side, though, I would probably go with the latter because in Logan's case, the heir to the Huntsberger name, and he's going to carry the family on into like, the next half century. And, then he's going to have sons that are going to do the same and it's going to be great. And just from what we know about Strobe Hayden, this was a man that probably turned his back on his son the first chance that he had, especially because of the pregnancy. He was probably like, you disgraced the family name. You're not going to Princeton like we wanted you to. The path that we foresaw for you is no longer in play. And because you're not living up to the expectations we had, snip, snip, financial ties cut, have a nice life. And I feel like that's probably how it went for him. So yes, he was privileged as a young person growing up until that point. But I would tend to lean more towards that he probably had to really tough it out in his 20s and find a way to get by predominantly on his own.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just sort of one of those excuses I see tossed around where it's just like, well, he had privilege, so therefore he can't struggle. Or, he should have done better because he has money. And I'm like, once again, glosses over the trauma and other life difficulties that he may have faced. And it just makes it very black and white, very simple, as if anything like this is ever simple. But I guess my sort of like last wrap up thoughts on this whole thing, and I've said this before and I'll probably say it again, but I really would have liked to see them do justice to the idea of unconventional family units in a way that wasn't just single parents, or divorcing parents or whatever, you know? I think it would have been great if they made it so that Chris and Sherry were kind of a thing all along, and Lorelai was genuinely happy for them without all of the jealousy. You know, like if he came back in season 1 and that was when he told them that he was dating someone new and then he's moving to Boston, he really wants to be around more, and Lorelai's like, that's great, I'm so glad things are going well for you, and you know, you'll be closer and you can see Rory more. I think if you want your protagonist to look good and magnanimous, don't also make her so compulsively jealous and irrational over a man she has turned down time after time. It just makes her look wishy-washy and sad and desperate a little bit. It would have been great to see her actually truly being supportive of Chris and Sherry and their baby, and be showing up for him and his wife in this new phase of their life without all that baggage, you know? If they truly were just teens who got into a pickle and don't belong together, maybe don't dangle a relationship with them in front of us as a cheap ploy for drama. You can still have, you know, tension and drama in the co-parenting dynamics that's really interesting to explore. And you know, you can still have the Gilmores pushing for Lorelai and Chris to be together, and you can still even have Chris be a bit of a ghost in the early years, but have them co-parenting more harmoniously despite the societal pressures, you know? Show people that this kind of harmonious setup can actually work if people are mature about it. It would make Emily and Richard and their views on the supremacy of the nuclear family look even worse if Lorelai and Chris were able to have a successful blended family. Like, without Lorelai, you know, constantly being like, oh, Chris is like the one I want, you know, just that whole back and forth that she does where like 1 minute she wants him and 1 minute she doesn't. You know, if she genuinely didn't give a shit about that relationship and she was truly just happy for them and supportive, that could have been a really, really cool thing to look at. And, you know, is it any more or less realistic than what we see in real life? I don't know. Obviously, some people do hold on to the old flames. Lorelai is certainly guilty of that, and she has her flaws. But it could have been an alternate route to go to hammer home one of the themes about family being who you choose and it not having to look like everyone else thinks it should look. So like, I'm sure that there were other topics that they could mine for drama that don't revolve around the will they won't they dynamic, because we already had that with Luke and Lorelai. Why do we have to watch it with her and Chris too? Like, and the other, you know, the trope of the nuclear family, the biological parents finally getting together and being together for the kid. Like, you know, don't give us that hope. Give us something like interesting and different, and give us like a Brady Bunch kind of situation.
Yeah, we've alluded to it in a previous episode, but just the whole idea of like, you know, we highlighted Modern Family and Full House as two shows that did that really, really well in the 90s and the 2000s. You know, family is not always going to be that idyllic, you know, Donna Reed-esque type of thing that we saw within the 50s, where it's mom, dad, kids, dog, kitty, you know, mom stays at home, dad brings in the bacon. You know, over the past 75 years or so, we've really seen a departure from that. And I think we're going to continue to see that evolve, you know, as we move ahead in the future, and family dynamics are going to change. And what your typical family looks like is no longer going to be typical based on what we have envisioned it to be in the past and what we expect. And we just need to, again, I use this word a lot, but I think it's just important, allow for compassion for that, and for people who are struggling with single parenthood, kids who are struggling with, you know, being abandoned by parents. Just be kind and understanding to what each individual family looks like, the struggles that they may have, and just be a support system for one another in that regard.
Yeah, another one that comes to mind is actually Reba. You know, have you ever watched Reba?
Mm-mm.
I mean, okay, mild spoilers I had for Reba, but so like Reba was married and they had 3 kids together. I think it was 3 kids. It's at least 2, maybe 3. And then the dad leaves Reba for a younger woman, and then I think that woman gets pregnant and they have another kid, maybe. I could be getting that wrong. But then their eldest kid, like Reba, and I think his name is Brock, if memory serves. It's been like a long time since I've watched the show. But their eldest daughter gets pregnant as like a teen, like 17 or 18. She's very young, with her boyfriend. And so it's sort of like the 2 families coming together, like, you know, mom and dad keeping it together for the kids, if you will, you know, like as Blink 182 once said, stay together for the kids. Just sort of the dynamics at play of the sort of like the ex dynamic and the new relationships and the teenage daughter who's pregnant and all of that kind of feels almost Gilmorean at this stage. But yeah. Also surprised that when you said kitty, that didn't activate zoomies. But, you know, that's neither here nor there.
We're not going to test that right now.
We're not going to test that theory. Anyway, I think that wraps us up unless you have any final thoughts.
No, I think we've hit home everything that we need to the past 3 weeks. But if you have been watching this 3-parter on Chris as a dad and you have any thoughts on, you know, anything that we've said, anything that you disagree with, we would love to hear, you know, anything and everything that you have to say. Please drop us a comment in any one of these videos and let us know where you stand. You know, on the Christopher scale, we know there's a lot of hate within the fandom for him. You know, we've tried to play devil's advocate about that the past couple of weeks because it really is a stance that we feel is important to take, but also one that we agree with, that this character is very misrepresented and misseen within the show. But again, drop us your comments if you feel differently. We'd love to hear your thoughts on what you have to say.
Yeah, I love looking at misunderstood characters in situations like this. It's a lot of fun. This is why we do this, because we have way too much to say. Yep. But on that note, you know, we're contractually obligated, obviously, to remind you each week from here until at least October that we will be in Connecticut, October 18th to 20th in Guilford for the best weekend of the year, the Gilmore Girls Fan Fest. Just one of the greatest fandoms. So many delightful people who are so welcoming and kind and warm. And cast and crew are just phenomenal. Come sing karaoke with Eris. You will not be disappointed. You know, they're dropping new announcements, I think, still. I mean, sorry, we're recording this in advance, so we're not quite sure, but like, just go with it. Definitely don't miss the opportunity to get your ticket because it's well worth it to make the trip to Connecticut. It's going to be a whole weekend full of Gilmore Girls awesomeness, and I'm already packing in my brain. So very excited. Check our description box for links to that. Go follow them on social media. Stay in the loop. Get your tickets before they're gone. And we hope to see you there.
Yep. Other than that, again, we hope you enjoyed this 3-parter. Join us for next week. We'll be continuing on with more content moving forward that we hope you will continue to stay invested in. Please go back and watch some of our old episodes as well, especially the 2 leading up to this, just to, you know, get a lead up to Chris as a father. We talked about him in his early years, him, you know, with Lorelai and Rory throughout the seasons. And please just remember to always do all of those YouTube things for us. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel. It's 1 click below. It really helps us out. And we're just continually grateful for all of the support.
I love how I always point as if people don't know which direction below is, but
I mean, it's fair.
It gives me something to do with my hands, frankly. If you haven't noticed, I'm a hand talker. But on that note, make sure to come back next Friday night for dinner. I think we'll be talking about Luke as a dad next week. There's a possibility that I could insert an episode on Rory's quote-unquote daddy issues first. Jury's out. But either way, it's going to be another sort of like dad-centric episode. And just digging into more bad parenting decisions on this show. We love it. And we know you do too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So come back and join us for that. In the meantime, enjoy your weekend. Continue to binge Gigi because why should you never not? And we will see you next Friday for dinner.
Bye.
Take care.